and welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelley Vick. I'm the host of the program, and in just a moment, it will be my pleasure to introduce today's guest. But first, a reminder that if you like what you hear, please do take a moment to subscribe. It helps us out, and you can make sure you never miss an episode. Also, we've opened a Literary Prospects shop, so if you're looking for bookish shirts, totes, and gifts, please check that out at literaryprospects.etsy.com. And to grab books featured on the podcast and check out more curated book lists, you can visit the Literary Prospects bookstore on bookshop.org. And last, but certainly not least, if you're interested in extra content on querying and publishing that's only for our members, please consider joining the Literary Prospects Patreon at patreon.com/literary prospects. We'll leave all those links below in the show notes. And now, let's introduce today's guest. Shobha Rao moved to the United States from India at the age of 7. She's the author of the short story collection An Unrestored Woman and the novel Girls Burn Brighter, which was longlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize and was a finalist for the California Book Award and the Goodreads Choice Awards. Her sophomore novel, Indian Country, is out now. Shobha is the winner of the Catherine Ann Porter Prize in Fiction and was a Grace Paley Teaching Fellow at the New School. Her story, Kavitha and Mustafa, was chosen by T.C. Boyle for inclusion in Best American Short Stories. Shobha lives in San Francisco. Shobha Rao, thank you so much for joining today to talk about your highly anticipated sophomore novel, Indian Country. Kirkus Reviews says Indian Country admirably undoes the conventions of the assimilation novel, a lyrical and propulsive story that makes the most of its double-edged title. Paul Yamazaki from City Lights Booksellers says, a profound meditation. The storytelling is magical and the language is precise and beautiful. And Rick Simonson from Elliott Bay Bookstore says, Indian Country is a marvelous exploration of people trying to make different lives in a radically new place, even as they're drawing on manners and ways inherited in a now distant homeland. A gift of Shobha Rao's storytelling to behold. So, with that, what can you tell us about Indian Country? How would you describe the book?
Well, I think it is working, or I tried to make it work on many levels. So the first layer is, of course, just the storytelling, right? So there's an Indian couple from India, newlyweds. They don't want to be really married to each other, but they're forced into this marriage because of familial circumstances. And they moved to Montana, southeastern Montana, to what is taking on Sagar, who's the main character, the husband, his job, which is as a hydraulic engineer, he's hired to take down a dam on a river called the Cotton River. So here they are in this new country, in a new marriage. And early on in the novel, in the course of Sagar's, preparations to take down the dam, a woman dies at the base of the dam. And he sort of gets blamed for it, for not following protocol with the dam removal. And so there begins the heart of the story, which is kind of unraveling what happened to this woman, how did she die, and sort of Sagar, trying to understand and make others understand how he was not responsible for her death. So that's the layer, the plot sort of the novel. But then thematically, I really wanted to explore the ramifications of colonialism in India, manifest destiny in the United States, and how they've impacted generations historically and even in our current contemporary lives. And so the kind of violence and how it manifests through time and space. And I think probably the highest and next level of exploration that I did in this novel is this kind of, I guess the best way to say it is how land and rivers hold human memory and really all memory. And
Mhm.
that is what I think that stayed with me, at the core of what I wanted to convey in the novel.
I love that idea that the land and the rivers hold all memory.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah, Kelly, thanks for saying that. It came out of an article I read, over probably a decade ago. It was
Mhm.
about the stretch of highway in British Columbia called the Highway of Tears. And it is basically the reason it got that name is because dozens of women, mostly Indigenous women, have gone missing or have died on that particular stretch of highway. And the investigations into, what happened to these women and girls have been deeply flawed,
Mhm.
and a lot of them have gone sort of unsolved. And one in the article I was reading, a Native American elder said, our girls and our women have been forgotten, right? And I knew she was talking about, the legal process and the investigative elements of it. But I remember coming away from the article and thinking, "Oh, did is it are they're not forgotten. Something remembers. Like somehow
Mhm.
they're remembered, right?" And that's when that's when it started growing in me, this idea,
Mm.
this hope, really, that something does remember, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I would say that was probably the first obvious genesis of this novel, right? Like I think as writers, the novels and stories build inside of us from,
Mhm.
the minute we gain consciousness, right?
Mhm.
But this story, if I had to pinpoint the moment, it would be reading of that article and walking away and thinking, no, nothing is completely forgotten.
Yeah. Did I read that you spent time working on this novel in the Badlands of South Dakota?
I
Oh.
did. I mean, both Girls Burn Brighter I wrote in the Badlands, and then I did work on this novel. And, I have to say something about the enormity, the vastness of the space.
Mhm.
And also, I would say some like its power, like the power of the natural world in spaces like the Badlands of
Mhm.
South Dakota. It's truly humbling and sobering. And you understand not just like the the smallness of human life, right?
Mhm.
In cosmic time, but then you also feel really, really meaningful. Like your journey is truly meaningful in spaces where there's such utter silence, and really there's nothing besides you and the natural world. Like you feel so incredibly woven in to the tapestry of, you know, geological history. You're like, I'm meant to be here. And my life has meaning because I am here and I'm watching this summer storm come in, and I realize it has the power to destroy me, but here I am standing in its midst and just, sort of taking in the beauty of this storm. And that's just a small example of like the small and everyday ways in which I felt so moved by the landscape around me. And they absolutely fed the writing of this novel. I mean, how can they not, to be humbled and feel the magnificence of such landscapes? Truly, they entered this novel.
Well, you've said, and you even mentioned earlier when you were describing the book, that you wanted to write a novel that is a meditation on the majesty of the land and the rivers, and for this new novel to be a testament to what you believe with all of your heart, that all land is sacred. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yes, of course. So I was born in India, and my family and I immigrated to the United States when I was around 8.
Mm.
And I think that the process of migrating, it makes you see the world in a more intimate way, I would say,
Mm,
just in my experience. And
mhm,
I'm not saying it's exclusive to immigrants, but you realize that there is no land anywhere that is superior to any other land,
mm,
right? And I
mhm,
think certainly, like I said, being raised Hindu, we worship rivers, we worship um, landscapes and mountains. And I think that never left me, right? So I came to the United States and I'm like, yes, this is just as sacred and it just as, worthy of worship as the Ganges River in India.
mhm.
So is the Cotton River, which is based on the Tongue River, which is the actual river in southeastern Montana. And to me, sacredness flows through everything, right? And so I did want to sort of, um, not only explore that in my novel, but just really celebrate how holy, every space is that we walk through and within.
What do you think that experience of moving from India to the United States at 8 years old, did you say, um, shapes your writing?
Well, that's a great question. So I think, when people ask me, "Oh, when did you become a writer?" I want to say I became a writer on the plane over from India.
Wow.
Like, yeah. Because what happened is I land in the United States. I didn't know I knew almost no English, right? Maybe a few words. So what happens when you lose language
Mm,
is you start sort of keenly observing the world, right? Because you can't speak it, you can't voice it. So
mm,
you become an incredible observer of the small moments and the small sort of changes in light or expressions in a person's face or because you can't speak and you're not so you become a listener and not just of people but of the world around you. And so in some ways it was a gift to lose that language, but it was also an incredible loss, right? Both at once.
yeah.
um and I remember reading this story about Laura Ingalls Wilder and how, I don't know if you know, I was a huge reader of the Little House on the Prairie books when I was a kid. But I remember reading an anecdote that her sister Mary, who's her older sister, had gone blind from
Mm,
scarlet fever.
mhm,
And so when they were children, right? And so Laura Ingalls narrated the world to her sister, right? So what they were passing through, what they were seeing, maybe, the clouds in the sky or whatever. And um, she was saying in this anecdote that I was reading that that's when she became a writer, right? Because
mm,
she was forced to describe the world to her
mhm.
sister. And in my experience of emigrating, without language, I was forced to describe the world to myself and narrate it to myself in the, confines of my own head, right? And I think that's when I became a person who's able to narrate the world to myself
Wow.
and ultimately to others. I hope so.
Oh, I love that so much. And then did you and you continued with that? Mm,
Well, I did stuff like I grew up and, had all the struggles of,
good stuff. Grew
adolescence.
up.
And then I ended up actually studying engineering. And then I went to law school. I mean, this is not all sort of in avoidance of my fate. It's not like I was like,
Mhm.
oh, I want to write but oh, let me go do something, productive, quote unquote, or makes money. But then after all that, I realized that really my true love, what I was drawn to and over again, was stories,
Mm,
right? And growing up in a kind of isolated environment in central Indiana, which is where I spent most of my adolescence, I
mm,
read a lot. I mean, I read all the time, and books were my closest companions, my closest friends, really. And so as I grew into adulthood, I thought to myself, like, stories literally saved my life. right?
Oh, yeah.
In the isolation of adolescence, in the challenges of being a minority,
Mhm.
walking through a world that I was trying to understand, um, and did ultimately or came to through books. And I thought, I want to write a story. Can I tell a story? And that's that idea, that question kind of grew in me. And so in my late 20s, I started writing. And boy, was it a doozy. Like I had no idea what I was getting into because it took me 15 years to get published. And not that that is the, the end of what it means to be a storyteller, because we're all of us are storytellers. But I sort of had this ambition of getting published. So it took all those years to sort of learn how to tell a story well, for me. And
Yeah.
so that's been a deeply rewarding and, kind of a circuitous journey. So
Well, you've learned. I think
thank you
you've
so
got
much.
it down now.
Thank you.
I want to come back and hear more about your actual publication journey. But
Um,
before we get into that, I wanted to talk a little bit about the structure of Indian country because it's so beautiful. We have this main narrative, and
uh,
then we have these smaller short stories woven throughout almost that speak to the deeper issues at play. How did you come up with this structure?
so what's interesting, Kelly, is that I wrote the stories, the interstitial
Mhm.
stories first.
Wow.
And yeah, which, because like I said, with after reading about the Highway of Tears and sort of living with those questions of, what remembers,
Mhm.
I just sat down and started writing stories of what remembers, right?
Mhm.
And those became the sort of interstitial stories that are punctuated throughout the book. And then I think that the stories are there, the smaller stories within the main narrative, because I really wanted to explore the ramifications, as I said earlier, of colonialism
Mhm.
and Western expansion and the kind of um, violence and also the changes they brought with them into these sort of untouched landscapes. And I shouldn't say untouched because we had native peoples living there, we had Indian
Mhm.
people living there,
Mhm.
but that it was a kind of hubris that came onto the land, right?
Mhm.
I wanted to really explore that over time, not just in the context of, these two main characters from India, in Montana in this particular slice of time, but over the course of a couple of hundred years, really.
Mhm.
And I could not think of any way to do that but to like have these stories and really not explain them, just have them there and have this feeling or this sort of critical mass of feeling build inside the reader. And so that they
Mhm.
walk away thinking, well, stories don't end, memories are held in
Mhm.
perpetuity. And so, what does that mean for our actions today? Like in the ways we walk through the land in which we destroy or honor land and rivers and water and air. And so I'm now making it like sound like it's a climate novel. And maybe it is that too,
Mhm.
because there is this, sort of walk lightly upon this earth. And I so firmly believe that. And what I think I wanted to speak to um, was what happens when you don't? What happens when you take a cudgel to it? And how does that manifest across space and time? And thereby came up with, sort of having interstitial stories every so often so that the reader has to sort of stay in that moment, maybe 150 years ago, and think, well, why is this here? And how does this, speak to what our characters are going through now in the main narrative?
There's also this wonderful lore that's woven throughout. I'm thinking about the great gray wolf, older brother, younger brother, porcupine. Was this all from your imagination or is it based on Native American stories? Where did all of that come from? How did it come about?
They're all made up from my head. I
I love
did,
it.
sort of like read lots of Native American mythology
Mhm.
and but they're all made up. And I think what, myths like Greek myths, Hindu myths have always just like I've always loved them, since childhood. And I think the myths and and stories that are t told in a fable-like way have a power and a kind of visceral um leave a visceral sort of experience within us. And I'm just thinking like Odysseus or Scheherazade. I mean, all of these fables and myths are enduring because they're told in a very um, precise way and with
Mhm.
precise language. And I wanted the novel to have a mythic quality in that same way, where there are gods and there's sort of um, uh, our fate is tied to their lives, like their experiences, their loves and losses and jealousies and, desires. So I wanted the novel to have a sort of abiding, deep, mythic, subterranean sort of river through it.
Mhm.
And so that's where all the myths came from, and they're all from here. So yeah. And with
They're
the great
wonderful.
gray, thank you. With the great gray wolf, what I really struggled with was how do I can say, oh, look at the Ganges River Valley or the, Cotton River Valley and, look how it's been affected or destroyed or honored or whatever. But I wanted a being to encapsulate the
Mm.
beauty and the just the magnificence of these lands and these
Mhm.
rivers. And I thought, I can talk on and on about it in exposition, or I can just have a God embody sort of the sacredness of this land
Mhm.
and the beauty of it. And that's where the gray wolf came in, because when I talk about the destruction of this land, for instance, what I did instead of talking about the destruction of land was to have a person kill the great gray wolf and thereby curse the land, right? And then that is, again, a visceral understanding of what
Mhm.
has happened. A god has been
Yeah.
killed by a human being. So guess what? We're going to pay the price for that, right? And our land is going to be cursed in some way, until the god is satisfied that we've paid the debt. And so, because the gods in these myths were vengeful, right? And they were like, oh, okay, now you're going to pay for this,
Mhm.
And so that's where the great gray wolf came from.
We're talking about violence against the land. You have also noted that women, and particularly women of color, have borne the brunt and paid the price for the violence and destruction of colonialism. Can
Mm.
you speak to that?
Sure. And I think, the when I think about conflict in the world, not just in, colonialism or Western expansion, settler colonies, etc. When I think about that, and conflict through all of time, truly it's women who are assaulted, who are raped, who are, forced at the end of the day to figure out how to feed their children in a time of war, when
Mhm.
in a time of famine. The women are the ones who are left to sort of pay the physical um, prices, right, for usually the wars that men wage. And or the wars usually waged by men, right? And so I, even today, when you read about conflicts around the world, women's bodies are on the line. Like that is the front line. And Kelly has it's well, first of all, it's never made sense to me. And it's always just filled me with so much rage and just, when I tell stories, I really want to confront that violence and say, let's, why does it exist? Why are women's bodies the final border, right? That is disputed and fought for and annihilated. And um, even, in the context of my Indian country, when in the interstitial stories, and even in the woman that dies, in the main narrative,
Mhm.
they're mostly women of color, and because those are the lives that are worth the least, right? And I'm, very much as a storyteller committed to telling the stories that disappear, the lives that are not counted, that are not um, acknowledged or explored in history books, right? And
Mhm.
that's like probably the deepest commitment I have as a writer. And we still see that. It's not something that happens oh so long ago. It happens today.
Yeah. What is your process like when you get these ideas, the first spark of an idea, when you read the article about the Trail of Tears, and what happens next? How do you go from this spark of idea to your fully completed novel?
Okay, so the first thing that happens, I think, I wish I had a process because then I would not freak out every time I finish a novel or a short story. But in general, what I've noticed is I'll hear something, I'll read something, or I'll even just see something, right? In while I'm walking around. Um, and it'll stay with me. Like I won't be able to get rid of it, right? Like, so, we see millions, thousands, hundreds of thousands of things a day, right? Moments, or we read so many articles now and we see so many images. And I think most of them just kind of filter through us.
Mhm.
But there's a few that stay inside of us, and we sort of keep coming back to them, right?
Mhm.
They can be moments of great sorrow, they can be moments of great joy, and or just like a passing, face of a child. Like this morning, I was watching the garbage trucks go by, and this little baby who was walking with his mom just was mesmerized by the action of this garbage truck, and like the baby wasn't blinking, it was just in awe, and I'm like, oh, that is the awe that I never want to like not see, witness, but I also want to cultivate inside of me, right? And I
Ah.
I hope that image of that little baby being in awe of this garbage truck stays with me through the rest of my life, truly. So the images that stay with me, I notice them, right? Because they keep coming back up. And then so I make note that I'm noticing them. And then eventually it's just interesting enough. Like it's marinated just long enough inside of me that it starts to like build like a kind of house around itself, right?
Mhm.
And then so then I'm like, okay, now I really got to pay attention, right? And I thought, well, what is there? And I think once that happens, then I start sort of the gears start turning,
Mhm.
and I'll start through maybe taking notes or reading up about it a little bit more. And then seeing if there's a story there, if there's conflict there, right? Because conflict is the heart of a story.
Mhm.
And is there some conflict inside of me, or was it inherently a very conflicted moment? And then from there, I'll start just kind of taking notes, and sometimes I have to leave it. Like it's just there's not much there, or I don't know how to build a story out of it, right?
Mhm.
But sometimes, rarely but beautifully, it'll just it'll start to, like, it's like tributaries to a river, like it'll start feeding into this bigger and bigger um, rush of water and thoughts and ideas, and then it builds, and then you have the novel, ultimately. But it can be many years in the making, maybe all of your life in the making, and
Mhm.
um, you got to trust in that. Like you got to trust in the fact that you it is meaningful and that it will um, give you enough, like give you enough food and it will shelter you in some way,
Mhm.
that initial spark. And because, writing is not just an incredible act of faith and suspended awe, right, in the process of creation, but it's belief in yourself that you
Mhm.
can, create um, something of meaning and wholeness. And that's a cultivated thing. It's not something you're one's born with. Maybe some are. I was not. Um, but yeah, it's an act of faith for sure.
Do you have a sort of a daily practice for your writing?
Uh, I wish. No, I don't have a daily practice because I do feel like there's periods, and I know a lot of writers do, and I think that's, really good and healthy to have a daily practice. For me, what happens is I have periods of intense reading,
Mm.
and then I have periods of intense writing, and then I go back to the reading. So it's constant juggle of those two lives and spaces inside of
Mhm.
me. But I feel like during the reading, I'm also just sitting with the world and with myself, right? I'm taking long walks, or I'm, having conversations with friends, and reading a lot. And so to me, it's almost like, you know, gathering the wood and the kindling,
Yeah.
right? And then you light the fire, and the spark, and starts the fire. But I gotta give myself time to gather that wood.
I heard someone say the other day that it's important to remember that reading is also writing. It's
Oh my gosh. Yes. And with any writer that, like a new writer or, writer starting out, how do you begin to write is by reading,
Mhm.
right? And, I don't like everything. Just read everything. It doesn't matter if like it's not your genre or it's not, it got bad reviews. It doesn't matter because at the worst case scenario is you learn how not to do it,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
you learn and um you know like if you love a book or you love a scene, like figure out how they did it.
Mhm.
How did they what was the dialogue and like how did they choose which moments to highlight, like which um, aspects of the character's face to put down in the writing in the scene, and it's such an incredibly precise act. So if I choose to talk about the character's eyebrows, and not their nose. Why did the writer make that choice? So
Mhm.
really reading is an act of studying writing.
Mhm.
And it is such an absolutely, in fact, in some ways, I think it's more important than writing. Right. In my own life, I do try to balance the two very much so. And reading still has that will always, I think, have that sense of like being with a friend,
Mhm.
when I'm with a book.
Mhm. Mhm.
And there's nothing I love more than curling up and reading a book for hours on end. And now it's become it's my job, but the joy of it and the study of it will never leave me, I hope.
What was the road to publication like for you?
Oh boy. I so like I said, it took me 15 years uh, to get published. And I say that because it's they were all every single year, every single day of those 15 years was worth it. Because if somebody said to me, build me a chair, and they gave me all the wood, which are words, I wouldn't know how to do it. Right? I have no idea how to build a chair.
Mhm.
Um, it's like writing is a craft and you learn it. Like you can't sit down at a computer and be like, oh, why is this not coming? Because why can't you build that chair? Right?
Mhm.
Study it. like study it, practice, fail, fail again. And so that was my process. A lot of failing, but a lot of getting better, right?
Hmm.
Every time I failed. And I, I have hundreds of rejections, maybe thousands. And uh, you know, it was never a happy thing, right? It was not like, oh, look, I got another rejection.
Great.
But with exactly. But every single time I would ask myself in a small way or a large way, do I want to keep going? Right? Because I mean, there's the world is saying, no, we don't want or need your work. So I have to answer that question. Do I want or need my work and my writing? And um, that's how every single day of those 15 years proceeded was, me asking that question every morning and answering it in the affirmative and then picking up that pen, right? And finally, I had a short story published in this journal called the Tincture Journal, and it was out of Australia. It was an Australian journal, literary journal, and I couldn't believe it because I was writing about women during the partition of India and Pakistan,
Hmm.
during partition, which happened in 1947, the partition of those two countries, and none of the sort of American US journals were really interested. And I thought, well, why am I mean, I'm writing about it, Indian and Pakistani women. Like, why am I just submitting to US journals? So I ended up submitting to an Australian journal and it happened. And they paid me like, I can't remember, like 25, 30, maybe, dollars and US. And I thought, I mean, it was my entire life felt, you know, um, worth it. Like it felt like all of it was in those 30 some dollars. It meant everything, right? And after that you get a little boost and then it just kind of built up a little bit. And then I won the Catherine Ann Porter Prize. And that sort of was the catalyst to my getting my agent because I had submitted and she was like, "Oh, you won this prize and you have this short story collection." So it all sort of happened very quickly at the end of those 15 years. But boy, those 15 years were long years of really believing in myself, right? Every
Yeah.
single day. And saying, you have a story to tell, so go tell it.
When you got your agent, you had a story collection.
Yes.
Did you also have your first novel at that point, or were you working on it? I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
we hear story collections are a little harder to sell, and maybe agents want to know, have you
Is
got a
there
novel? Yeah.
is there a novel brewing? So I did not have a novel. And in fact, when I got the contract to publish the short story collection, it was a two-book contract. So they
Mm.
definitely wanted a novel, like
Mm.
because they sell better and that was part of the contract and I had like a year or two to write it. And I didn't have an idea. It's not like I was sitting there thinking, oh, here's a novel that I want to write. But pretty quickly after I got the contract, again, the Badlands, and
Mhm.
it came
Mhm.
pretty quickly once I sat down. Unlike Indian Country, by the way, which took 6 years to write.
Wow.
Girls Burn Brighter, I probably wrote in 3 months,
Really?
and yeah, yeah. And so
Wow.
every novel is different. They're like children, like, there's no, almost nothing in common between Girls Burn Brighter, the writing of it, and Indian Country, except the author. Like, the writing of it, the challenges, how long it took, everything was different about the two novels.
How soon after you finished Girls Burn Brighter did you start on Indian Country?
That might have been the part of the problem, Kelly, is that I maybe waited too long um,
Mm.
reading uh, uh, the part of me that reads a
Mhm.
lot after finishing a project. I maybe extended that too long because I maybe took a year to start writing again. I think I just got really rusty, and I feel like I should have started earlier. And then the idea just wasn't coming together because I had written the interstitial stories first, and then I'm like, well, what's the main narrative that's going to go around it? And that was, a really challenging way to do it.
Mhm.
But ultimately, I arrived in the right place, but arriving there took 6 years, well, 5 years, right?
Yes.
So yeah, it was quite the journey.
What do you know now that you wish you had known before you published your first book?
Oh, yeah, so many things. I think I would have to choose the fact that I wish I had known that it really all comes down to perseverance. That,
Mm.
you know, the time it takes doesn't matter, though it does, right?
Mm.
Whether you have talent or you think you don't have talent, whatever, doesn't matter. The conditions of your life, what is possible, all of that comes down to perseverance. And there were years that I didn't write because I had to work full time and it was exhausting and, just didn't
Mhm.
write but I knew there's always a part of me inside of me that was like, you have got to do this. Like you will do this
Mm.
and put pen to paper and do it again and again and again and again, despite the rejections, despite the world and society saying, you know, obviously you're not going to get anywhere. Obviously you're not very good at this. Obviously there's nothing obvious about it. Get to work,
Mm.
persevere, and that's it. And I think I learned that the long way. But that's okay. Those are the best lessons.
Well, following on from that, because that is wonderful advice in general, but do you have a favorite piece of advice for aspiring authors?
Um, I think along with the perseverance, and how noble and important art is,
Mm.
um, that it is worth doing, especially in times like the ones we're living through now,
Mhm.
that art speaks truth to power, and art is a language in which we all can speak. We all must speak, and that our role in society is vital. It's vital because we tell the stories that are being silenced, that are being deported, that are being made invisible, and I won't stand for that, and no artist should. And this is our time. This is our time to step up and say, this is my response to the what is being taken from us and taken from our societies and our communities, and I'll create something beautiful despite all of that.
I love that, Shobha.
Thank you. I hope
You,
I can do it, and I hope we all can.
I hope we all can. We have a traditional last question on the
Yes.
podcast, and it is, when Indian country is made into a movie or series, what do you think the theme song should be?
Oh my gosh. Oh wow. Okay. The theme song. I do love Ode to Joy from Beethoven's Ninth, but that just is weird. That doesn't even make sense.
I don't
Um,
know. It could be cool.
it, it could be, you don't ever think joy can be captured in a piece of music or a piece of art, but who Beethoven did it,
Hmm.
um, there's yeah, so I'm gonna stick with that one.
I like it. I think that would be really cool. I like the
Yay.
juxtaposition.
Awesome.
Shobha Rao, thank you so much for coming on today. It has really been a joy talking with you.
Likewise, Kelly. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.